Picture a coffin. Now make it wrong. Make it nearly as wide as it is long, so wide that when you first see the drawing you think the draftsman's hand slipped, so wide that the man who orders it will not say the word coffin out loud, so wide that 6 of the strongest yeomen in England will not be enough to carry it. Add oak from a tree that was old when the Armada sailed, 600 weight of rolled lead, a workshop where every man has been sworn to silence on pain of losing his livelihood, and a court half a mile away that has spent 7 years pretending its queen can walk. That's London in the first days of August, 1714, the greatest city in Europe, and it is holding its breath, because the woman who rules it is dying in a bed she has not truly left in months, and almost nobody outside a locked circle of physicians and bedchamber women knows how bad it truly is. A place where the church bells can ring for a victory in the morning and be muffled for a death by nightfall. A place where a secret the size of a queen's own body can be kept for years, right up until the moment a carpenter has to build a box for it. Because here is the thing about secrets at court. Paint can hide a face. Skirts can hide a chair, curtains can hide a bed, but a coffin hides nothing. A coffin is a measurement, written in oak, and it tells the truth to anyone who sees it carried past. We're going back there tonight, not as courtiers bowing in the drawing room, not as historians reading the Gazette. We're going as the person who actually had to build the thing. One pair of hands, one workshop, everything they saw, smelled, heard, lifted, and were ordered never to speak of. So, I make these history stories, and honestly, I still have no idea whether anyone actually sleeps to them, or whether you're all just lying in the dark wanting to know how much a royal coffin weighs. Either way, subscribe if you like, get comfortable, here we go. The first thing you know about the Queen's death is a splinter. It is a little past 6 in the morning on the 1st of August 1714, and you're standing at the long bench in Master Josiah Harbin's workshop off St. Martin's Lane, easing a splinter out of the pad of your left thumb with the point of a marking awl, when a man in black hammers on the street door hard enough to rattle the shutter pins. Not a customer's knock, not a neighbour's. A knock that says open now, and you feel it in your chest before you understand it in your head. You're 15 years old. Your name is Thomas Cole. You've been apprenticed to Master Harbin, joiner and coffin maker to some of the best families in Westminster, for 2 years and 4 months, and in that time you've learned to read a knock the way other boys read a face. Slow knocks are grief that has had time to settle. Rapid knocks are grief that is still panic. This knock is neither. This knock is business, and it is frightened of being seen in the street. The splinter is still in your thumb when Master Harbin unbars the door. You never do get it out that day. You will find it 3 days later, risen black under the skin, and by then your hands will have far worse to complain of. The man in black does not come in past the threshold. He stands with the grey morning behind him, and you catch the smell of him from across the shop, over the shavings and the glue pot and the raw oak, rain-wet wool, and under it something you have learned to know in 2 years of this trade, the particular flat staleness of a man who has been awake all night in a sick room. He speaks too quietly for you to hear the words. You hear only the shape of them, and you see Master Harbin's back go very still, the way a man's back goes when he is being handed something too heavy to refuse. Then the man is gone, and the door is barred again, and Master Harbin stands facing it for the space of 10 breaths without turning around. "Bank the fire," he says at last, to the wall. "Send Ned home, and fetch down the long rods." The long rods are the measuring rods. Ash, straight-grained, marked in feet and inches with brass pins. You use them for the dead. And Ned, the journeyman, is being sent home, which has never once happened in 2 years and 4 months, because Ned talks in taverns, and whatever has just walked in through that door must not walk out through Ned's mouth. Master, you say, who has died? He turns around then, and his face frightens you more than the knock did. Master Harben is 51 years old, built like the trade built him, forearms like ship's cable, a white scar through one eyebrow where a chisel jumped 30 years ago. You have seen him measure children. You've seen him measure a woman dead of the smallpox with her husband screaming in the next room. His face never moves. It is moving now. Nobody has died, he says. That's the trouble. We are wanted for someone who is still alive. You don't understand, and you say so. You will, he says, wash your hands, put on your Sunday coat, and Thomas... He stops, picks up the smaller of the 2 rods and holds it out to you, and you see that his hand, his steady 51-year-old 10,000 coffins hand, is not quite steady. From the moment we leave this shop until the day I release you from it, you do not speak of what you see. Not to Ned, not to your mother, not to God himself in an open church where a man can overhear. Do you understand me? You say yes, sir, because you are 15, and it is the only thing you know how to say to him. You do not understand, not yet. But you take the rod, and its weight is familiar in your hand, 3 feet of ash you have carried into 40 houses of grief, and there is a strange comfort in that. Whatever this is, it is still the trade. It is still measuring. It is still wood. That is what you tell yourself, walking west through streets that are only just waking, past the milk women with their yokes creaking, past a boy sluicing the step of a chocolate house, past the smell of last night's rain drying off the cobbles, the rod under your arm, your Sunday coat too tight in the shoulders because you have grown since Easter, Master Harben beside you, saying nothing at all, walking faster than you have ever seen him walk. It is only when the trees of the park open out on your left, and the road bends, and you see the long brick front of Kensington Palace lying quiet in the grey light, with its chimneys barely smoking, that your stomach drops out from under you like a trapdoor, because there is only one person in that house, and the rod under your arm is for the dead. You're not taken in through the front of Kensington Palace. Of course you are not. Men like you do not exist at the front of palaces. You are led around by a gravel path that crunches too loudly under your shoes, through a gate in a wall, across a yard that smells of stables and wet ash, and in through a low door where you have to duck, into a corridor so dark after the morning light that you walk with one hand trailing the plaster. The plaster is cold. That is the first thing you truly notice about the palace of the Queen of Great Britain. The wall is cold and slightly damp under your fingertips, like the wall of any house, and somewhere above your head a floorboard creaks under someone's slow feet, and the whole great building is silent in a way that no building full of people has any right to be. Not empty, silent, held silent. 200 people are in this house, and every one of them is being quiet on purpose, and the effect is worse than screaming. The man leading you is the same man in black from the shop doorstep. You learn later that he is a clerk from the Lord Chamberlain's office, and that his name does not matter, and that men like him are the way the great machine of a court does the things it cannot admit to doing. He walks you and Master Harben up a back stair with a rope in place of a rail, along a passage, and stops at a door where a woman is waiting with a candle, although it is full morning. The woman is perhaps 50, dressed plain and good, and her eyes are red-rimmed and absolutely dry. which is its own kind of terrible. She looks at the rods under your arms the way people always look at the rods, and then she does something nobody has ever done. She puts her hand flat against Master Harben's chest, not pushing, just holding him still, and she says she is asleep. He is. She will not wake, the doctors say, but if she wakes, you are cabinet makers, come about the presses in the wardrobe. Say it. We are cabinet makers, Master Harben says, come about the presses in the wardrobe. She looks at you. Cabinet makers, you say. Your voice cracks on the second word, the way it has been cracking since the spring, and in any other room on any other morning someone would laugh. Nobody laughs. The woman only nods once and opens the door. The smell reaches you before the sight does. You've stood in 40 sick rooms and death rooms, and you know the family of smells that live in them, but this room has been sick for years, and it smells of years. Burnt vinegar, thrown on the fire to sweeten the air. So much of it, and so often that it has soaked into the very hangings. Under that, poultices, bread and milk gone sour, and herbs. Under that, the sweetish heaviness of a body that cannot be washed as a body should be washed, that has been sponged and wrapped and dressed in its bed for longer than anyone will say. And under everything, faint and constant, the smell you know from old men's gouty feet in the parish, the smell of flesh at war with itself. You breathe through your mouth. You were taught that in your first month. Breathe through your mouth. Keep your eyes on the work, and the work will carry you through the room. Then you look at the bed, and the work nearly fails you. You had heard the things everyone in London had heard, that the Queen was stout, that the Queen was troubled with gout, that the Queen was carried to her coronation in a chair 11 years of gout ago, and hardly walks now. You had heard it the way you hear that the King of France is old and the sea is salt, words with nothing inside them. What is in the bed is not stout. What is in the bed is a mountain of a dying woman, propped so high on bolsters that she's almost sitting, her breath coming in long dragging pulls with a click in the middle of each one, her face grey-yellow above the sheet, and strangely small, almost sweet. A small round face on a body that the bedclothes cannot disguise, hands swollen so tight the skin shines, wrapped loose in flannel bands. 49 years old. 17 times with child, you will learn later. 17 times, and not one child living. Ruler of Great Britain and Ireland. The woman whose name is on the coins in your pocket, and the prayers in your church, and no one in the world outside this floor of this house has been allowed to know what those years have actually done to her, because a queen must be seen to be a queen, and so for years she has been carried through her own palace in a chair with poles, and hoisted through cut floors between stories in a rigged seat like cargo, and painted and dressed and propped for the shortest possible audiences, and the court has smiled and said Her Majesty is a little troubled with the gout, and now the pretending is nearly over, and someone has to build the box, and the box cannot pretend. Master Harben takes off his hat. You snatch yours off a half-second later, ears burning. The woman with the candle closes the door behind you, and the click of the latch is the loudest thing in the world. Quickly, she says, and gently. If you touch her as if she were your own mother. Here is what nobody tells you about measuring the living for a coffin. The rods feel obscene. With the dead there is a settled honesty to it. The person is gone. The measurements are a mercy, a last fitting for a last garment. But the Queen's breath drags and clicks, and her eyelids are not quite closed. a wet line of white showing beneath each one, and as Master Harben stretches the first rod along the bed beside her, from the crown of her head toward her feet, you find you are matching your own breathing to hers without meaning to, and your hands are sweating on the ash. He does not touch her. He measures beside her, above her, air measurements, his eye doing what his hands cannot. He has done this for fat aldermen and dropsical widows. The skill exists, but you watch him check the width across the shoulders 3 times, and then a 4th, and you see the problem arrive in his face like weather. He beckons you to the other side of the bed, puts your end of the second rod into your hands, and so it is you, Thomas Cole, 15, a joiner's apprentice with a splinter in his thumb, who holds one end of the measurement that will become the most whispered about fact in England, while your master reads the brass pins at the other end, and his lips move with the number, and he closes his eyes for a moment as if the number hurts him. You look down the rod. You cannot help it. The width at the widest, allowing for wrapping and cerecloth and the swelling that death and lead and August heat will bring, is going to come out within a foot of the length, maybe less. The length is no great length. She was never tall. The width is what it is. The coffin of Queen Anne is going to be almost square. You hear the woman by the door make one small sound, quickly stopped, a sound like a stitch pulled too tight, and you understand with the whole skin of your body that she has known this was coming for years, that this room has known, that the flannel bands and the vinegar and the hoisting chair and the closed doors have all been the long, slow keeping of exactly this secret, and that you, a boy with a rod, have just been made the newest keeper of it, and that the rod does not care about any of them. The rod just tells the truth in feet and inches. The Queen's breath drags and clicks and drags. On the bedside table among the physic bottles, there is a little dish of dried orange peel, and a book of common prayer with a green ribbon in it, and a small ivory comb with 2 teeth missing. You do not know why the comb is what your eyes fasten on. Maybe because it is the only ordinary thing in the room. Somebody combs her hair still. Somebody stands here in the mornings in all this ruin and secrecy and combs the Queen's thin greying hair gently, the way you would for anyone, and that small kindness undoes you more than all the rest of it together. Master Harben folds his notes into his breast against his skin. "Done," he says quietly to the woman. "God keep her." "He is about to," the woman says, and she opens the door and puts you both out of the room, out of the secret's heart, back into the held, silent corridor, carrying the secret with you now in a folded paper, warm from your master's chest. You are back in the yard, in the gravel, in the ordinary grey morning air before you realise your face is wet. You wipe it on your sleeve before Master Harben can see. He sees anyway. He says nothing about it. He only puts his hand once on your shoulder, heavy as a beam, and steers you toward the gate. And the last thing you hear from the Palace of Kensington is a single ordinary sound floating from an open window somewhere. A maid, far off, beating a carpet. Hump, hump, hump. The world going on, the world not knowing. By tomorrow morning the whole of it will know she is dead. What it will not know, what only you and perhaps a dozen souls alive know on this first morning of August, is the shape of the box she must be buried in, and everything that shape confesses. And now you have to build it. She dies the next morning, Sunday, the 1st of August, 1714, at about 7:30 o'clock, and London learns it the way London learns everything, in a wave that you can actually hear moving. You're in the workshop when it comes. The doors are barred, the shutters up on a Sunday, and you're on your knees among the timber stock with a candle, going board by board through the oak with Master Harben, when the first bell begins, not ringing, tolling. One heavy stroke, then the long dead space, then another, St. Martin's close by. Then, faint under it, another bell farther east takes it up, and another, and within a quarter of an hour the whole city is doing it. Dozens of churches, none in time with each other, these strokes overlapping and colliding until the air itself seems to be limping, and through the shutter slats you can hear the street change, doors opening, voices, one woman somewhere crying out short and sharp, and then a strange thing, a settling, the whole street going quieter than a Sunday should be. Master Harben does not lift his head from the timber. There it is, he says. Now we may work. You've never heard anything so cold, and then you understand it was not cold at all. Until the bells, you were building a coffin for a living woman, which is a thing so unlucky and so improper that neither of you had let a saw touch wood. The bells make it honest. Now she's only your client, like all the others. Now the trade can hold you up. He talks to you while you work through the stock, and it is more than he has talked in 2 years, and you understand that too. He is talking so that neither of you has to listen to the bells. Not this one. His thumbnail finds a hair shake in the end grain you'd missed. She carries lead. Everything carries lead, and lead forgives nothing. Tap, and he listens to the board like a doctor at a chest. The Queen goes down into the earth in 3 coffins, boy, one inside the next. Wood against her, then lead sealed with solder around the wood, then a great coffin of oak around the lead, covered in velvet, and that outer one is the only one the world ever sees. Lead, so the vault stays sweet. In August, above all, lead, and the oak must carry it. 600 weight and more when all's done, maybe 7 with her, God rest her. 700 weight hanging from handles and cross battens, and the strength of the joints I teach you. So, tap. Not this one. 700 weight. You do the sum in your head against things you know. 3.5 of the big flour sacks off the Bridewell wharf, and you can barely walk 10 paces with one. 8 strong men then, and each of them still carrying more than a sack. Up steps, through doors, down into a vault in the dark without stumbling, before the eyes of everything great in England. Master, you say, what happens if a joint fails? He is quiet long enough that you think he will not answer. In my grandfather's time, he says at last, at a great funeral in the North Country, a bottom failed on the stair of the church. I'll not tell you what came after, except that the family paid to have the stair itself torn out and built new, because no one would set foot on it. That is what happens, so it does not happen. Fetch the glue pot. The order for the work comes properly on Monday, and it comes with company. The clerk in black returns, and with him this time a warrant with seals on it that Master Harben reads twice, and locks in his strong box, and a second man, older, soft-spoken from the great wardrobe, the office that clothes everything royal, living or dead. This man never once says the Queen's measurements aloud. He refers throughout to the dimensions you hold, as if the numbers themselves were a prisoner in Master Harben's breast pocket. He tells you the outer coffin will be covered in purple velvet, the colour kings mourn in, and that the velvet, the gilt nails, the engraved plates, the handles, all come from other men, sworn men, each holding one piece of the work and none of them the whole. The plumber who casts and solders the lead is sworn. The men who will carry her are the yeomen of the guard, and they are sworn by their places. Everything about this death is being cut into pieces small enough to keep, except that it cannot be kept. That is the thing you begin to understand in the first days, and it settles into you like the ache in your forearms. The court kept her secret while she lived because a living queen can be arranged, propped, painted, carried, cropped down to a face at the end of a room. A dead queen is a cargo. She must be moved, and the box that moves her has a width, and the width will pass before witnesses, and every yeoman who staggers under a corner of her will go home to a wife. You cannot swear the shape of a thing to silence. They know it too, the men with the seals. You can see they know it. All this machinery of oaths is not to keep the secret. It is to make sure that when the secret walks out into the world as it must, no single man can be pointed at as the one who let it go. You are 15, and you're learning how power actually works, and you are learning it holding a glue pot. The oak you finally choose together comes from the back of the loft. Boards Master Harben has owned longer than he has owned you, quarter sawn, the medullary rays flashing silver when you tilt them to the light, so old and settled that when you set a plane to the edge the shaving comes off in one unbroken ribbon, the full length of the board, and hangs off your wrist like a curl of pale hair. The smell of cut oak fills the shop, sweet sour, a smell you love, and will love your whole life even after this. That faint vinegar sharpness under the sweetness, oddly close, cousin to the burnt vinegar of the death room, as if the tree had known where it was going. You work with the shutters closed. All that week, London swirls outside them, and you hear it in scraps through the wood. The Elector of Hanover is proclaimed King George the same Sunday she dies, at St. James's, at Charing Cross a few streets away, and you hear the herald's trumpets thin and brassy through the shutters and the crowd's noise after. A sound with no grief in it at all, curiosity and calculation and some cheering, because half of London had been braced for another thing entirely. All year the coffee-houses had chewed on it. Whether the Queen's own half-brother across the water, the Pretender, would come with French ships when she died, whether there would be blood in the streets over the Crown. You hear men argue it right outside the shutter one evening. Two voices, one saying the guards were doubled and the trained bands out, the other saying it was all done bloodless. The Whigs had the council and the seals, and the German would have the throne warm before the Jacobites finished their toasts. And you kneel inside in the shavings with your ear a foot from their voices, fitting a bottom board to a coffin nearly as wide as its length, holding in your two hands the one fact in England that neither of them knows. There is a power in that which shames you. You are ashamed of how it warms you some nights. Every apprentice in London is nobody. You are nobody with a secret, and you learn that week that a secret is the closest thing to money that a nobody can carry, which is exactly what Master Harben is afraid of, because on Wednesday, the fourth day, the secret comes looking for you. His name is Mr. Pratt, or so he says, and he catches you at the conduit, because the work of the world does not stop for the work of queens, and someone still has to fetch the water for the glue pot and the whetstones, and that someone is you, twice a day, with 2 leather buckets on a yoke to the conduit at the end of the lane, where you wait your turn behind the cookmaids and the horseboys the same as always. The yoke bites the same groove into your shoulders it has bitten for 2 years. The buckets drag your arms long. Everything is ordinary, and you have been told to keep it ordinary, and that is how they find you. Ordinariness is a pattern, and patterns can be weighted beside. He is leaning against the conduit house wall on Wednesday morning, A man of maybe 40 in a good snuff-coloured coat, clean linen, the kind of dress that is nobody in particular on purpose, and he falls in beside you on the walk back as easily as if you had arranged it, and he talks about the weather and the price of oak, and what a quantity of black cloth the mercers are selling this week, and then, in exactly the same pleasant voice, he says, "They say Harbin's shop has the honour of Her late Majesty's work." That must be a fine thing for a young man, a historical thing. The buckets pull at your arms. You keep walking. You say what Master Harbin drilled into you on the very first evening, made you say back to him 10 times over till it came out smooth. "We've a deal of work in hand, sir. I couldn't say whose. Master keeps the orders." Of course, of course. Pleasant as milk. 20 more steps of weather and prices. Then, "It's only that a wager stands among some gentlemen of my acquaintance, concerning the late Queen's person. Her state of health these last years, you understand. There are those who say one thing and those who say another, and a great deal of money says each. Now a lad who had seen, say, a certain piece of work in a certain shop, its shape, nothing more, its mere shape, could settle such a wager with one word, and never say a word about anything at all, if you follow me. And gentlemen who win wagers are grateful gentlemen, a guinea grateful, perhaps 2. 2 guineas. You are paid nothing. You're an apprentice. Your mother in the Savoy takes in plain sewing and counts her coal by the scuttle half. 2 guineas is her winter. And the thing he is asking for is one word, and the word is already loose in your mouth like a pulled tooth, and it would be so easy. And this is the exact moment. You understand many years later, where your whole life stands on a joint and holds or fails. What holds it is not virtue, be honest, since it is only us here in the dark. What holds it is the memory of a small ivory comb with 2 teeth missing on a table, crowded with physic bottles, and a woman's hand flat on your master's chest, saying as if she were your own mother. Somewhere behind all the seals and warrants there was a person in a bed, breathing in drags and clicks, whose body had been the talk and the sport and the wagering of cruel men her whole life, 17 children and not one living, and this snuff-coloured man on a public street is cruel men's errand boy, come to buy the last privacy she has left, the few days between her death and her burial, for 2 guineas off a water boy. "I couldn't say, sir," you say. Master keeps the orders. A pity, still pleasant. He stops walking. You keep on, and his voice follows you, and it has changed by just 1 degree, the way milk changes a day before it turns. "You'll be Thomas, I think. Widow Cole's boy, the Savoy. Mind how you go with those buckets, Thomas. You do not run. You will always be proud of that, small and stupid as the pride is. You walk the whole length of the lane with your heart slamming and the water going over the bucket rims at every step, soaking cold through your stockings, and you get inside the shop door and set the yoke down, and then your legs sit you straight down on the pile of oak offcuts without asking your leave." Master Harbin takes 1 look at you and puts down his chisel. You tell him all of it, every word both times through, because he makes you say it twice, watching your mouth. When you come the second time to Widow Cole's boy, the Savoy, something happens in his face that you have never seen and will never see again, a stillness with fire under it, like a banked forge. "You said it right," he says, both answers, word for word right. And then, roughly, because gentleness embarrasses him, "You did well, Thomas." That afternoon he goes out for 2 hours in his good coat and does not say where. That evening a porter brings a parcel to your mother in the Savoy, a flitch of bacon, a loaf of double refined sugar, and sea coal, a full sack of it, from her son's master, with his compliments on her son's good conduct. And from that night until the funeral, you sleep in the workshop, on a pallet between the bench and the banked fire, with the street door barred and Master Harben's old dog Bramble, who is deaf and mostly blind and still the best bar on the door there is, because what Bramble lacks in ears he makes up in nose sleeping across your feet. You lie there that first night in the smell of oak and glue and dog, listening to the small ticks of the timber settling, and beyond the shutter the watchman calling 11 of the clock, and you think about Mr. Pratt's gentlemen and their wages, and you understand something new and sour about the world, that the court's great secret was never really about gout, or dropsy, or the size of a suffering woman. It was about this. It was about keeping her out of the mouths of men like that for as long as breath and paint and carried chairs could do it. 7 years of stagecraft, cut floors, hoisting chairs, closed doors, all of it a wall around a body, and the wall held mostly while she lived. And in the morning you'll get up and go on building the thing that brings the wall down, because the box cannot lie. You can swear every tongue in England and the box will still be the box. The bottom goes together on the Thursday and Friday, and it is the finest joinery you have ever been part of, and no one who matters will ever see an inch of it. That is the trade, Master Harben says, catching the thought off your face the way he does. The best work goes into the dark. 3 thicknesses of oak for the bottom, cross-battened, every joint drawn up with glue and tree nails, and then, because lead forgives nothing, clenched iron besides. He has you bore for the clench nails, and your palms take the auger's ash handle hour after hour until the skin polishes and then blisters, and then, over the days, hardens into something new. And at night on the pallet your hands go on gripping and turning in your sleep, opening and closing on nothing, aching up past the wrists, and you soak them in the water butt in the mornings, cold biting into the split knuckle skin, and flex them 10 times, and take up the auger again. This is what nobody puts in the histories, and it is the part you will remember when the names of lords have all gone out of your head, that a state funeral is made by hands. Somewhere under every crown that has ever been lowered weeping into a vault, there is a boy with an auger and blisters, and a splinter gone black in his thumb, and glue in the creases of his fingers that no scrubbing gets out, so that for a fortnight you go about marked, faintly webbed with amber at every crease, as if the work were growing into you. Saturday the 7th of August, the plumber comes to take his own dimensions off your work, and stands looking down into the open oak shell for a long time with his hat in his hands. He is an old man, the plumber, sworn like the rest, with a burn-scarred wrist and a voice ruined by solder smoke to a whisper. He measures, writes, measures again. And then he says the only thing anyone in all those weeks ever says out loud about what you're all actually doing, and he says it in his ruined whisper to the coffin itself, not to you. Poor lady, all them years, and this is what they was keeping. Then he puts his hat on and goes to cast her lead, and you take up the plane, and outside the shutters London roars on, proclaiming its new German king, laying its wagers, selling its black cloth, knowing nothing, and the shape in the middle of the workshop grows day by day under your hands, wide and true and impossible to explain away, the shape of the truth itself waiting for its velvet. Let me give you one whole ordinary day of that fortnight, because the extraordinary days lean on the ordinary ones the way a roof leans on walls, and because it is the ordinary hours, not the great ones, that your body will remember longest. You wake on the pallet before 5 in the dark because the watchman's 4 o'clock cry has gotten into your sleep and set something ticking. The workshop at that hour is all smells and no sights. Banked fire, dog, oak, the sharp animal reek of the glue pot cold in its water jacket, the leather of the aprons on their pegs, and under it all the faint sourness of your own blanket, which has been an apprentice's blanket for longer than you have been an apprentice. Bramble stirs against your feet, groans like furniture, resettles. You lie still for the space of 10 breaths, which is a luxury, and take the inventory of your body the way labouring people do before they consent to move it. The forearms first, aching in their long muscles from yesterday's boring, a deep sweet ache like a bruise inside the flesh. The palms hot, the small of the back, the left thumb with its black passenger of splinter, which you press against your forefinger, testing, the way your tongue would test a loose tooth. Then up. Fold the pallet behind the bench. Rake the fire open. Feed it small stuff, shavings and off-cut ends, kneeling on the cold brick with your face close so you can blow the seed of red into life, and the first flames light the underside of your master's benches all along the wall, and the great shrouded shape on the trestles in the middle of the room stands up out of the darkness, and you say, quietly, because you've gotten into the way of it and cannot now stop, "Morning, madam," and go to break the ice skin of dust off the water butt and wash. Cold water on the face, on the neck, up the forearms. The split places on your knuckles sing. You eat standing, yesterday's bread, a heel of cheese, small beer from the jug, and you eat looking at the work, because that also you've gotten into the way of, walking the eye around the joints while the mouth is busy, hunting for anything that's shifted or checked in the night, the way a shepherd counts sheep before he is properly awake. Master Harburn comes down at 6 with his stock tied crooked, which Mrs. Harburn will repair before he's let out of doors, and the day proper begins, and the day proper is work, hour on hour of it. And here is what the hours are actually made of, since no history book will ever stoop to say. Sharpening. First. Always first. 20 minutes of it. The stones laid out in their order, coarse to fine, the oil in its can, and each iron and each chisel taken across the stone in the figure your master's father taught him. The steel whispering, your fingers testing the wire edge off the back, the smell of oil and steel dust, and your hands learning stroke by stroke and week by week. The thing that cannot be taught in words. What sharp actually is, which is not a fact but a feeling, arriving up through the fingertips like cold or warmth. Then the work itself, and the work is the body. Planing is the legs and the belly as much as the arms. You learn to lock your wrists and throw the stroke from the hips, and by the 10th stroke you are warm, and by the 50th your shirt is stuck to your back, and the shavings pile over your shoe-tops and release their smell as they curl. And there is a state you get into, everyone in the trade knows it and nobody names it, where the strokes take over their own counting, and the mind goes up and sits on a shelf somewhere and watches, hours going by underneath it like water under a bridge. Boring is worse and stupider. Boring is just strength against oak. Lean and turn, lean and turn. The augers scrape and bite, chips climbing the flute and spilling warm over your fist. And you learn to spell your arms, left over right, right over left, and to stop when the shake starts, because a shaking arm bores a drunken hole, and lead forgives nothing. At 9, Mrs. Harburn brings down bread and butter and a word about the state of your collar. At noon there is dinner in the kitchen behind, boiled beef or peas, hot and plenty. the one unarguable virtue of this apprenticeship known up and down the lane, and Master Harben says grace over it the same 14 words daily, and eats without speaking, and you have learned to read his day and how he salts. Then work again, the long afternoon, the light going brassy through the shutter cracks and swinging its slow bars across the floor. And this is the low tide of the body, 3 o'clock, 4, the ache setting up house in the shoulders, the feet swelling in your shoes, and this is the hour mistakes are born. And so this is the hour he gives you the course safe work and takes the fine himself, and neither of you says why. And through all of it, outside the shutters, London mourns in London's fashion, which is to say, commercially, noisily, and in dead earnest all at once. You hear it in scraps all day like a play heard through a wall. The Mercers have tripled the price of black crape by the Wednesday and are sold out by the Friday. You hear 2 maids at the conduit trading the outrage like coin. Everyone who is anyone goes into full mourning, and everyone who is no one puts on what black they can. A band, a ribbon, and the whole city darkens over a week like water with ink dropped in it. And the effect in the streets, glimpsed when you're sent on errands, is stranger than you can say. All that darkness moving about its ordinary business, buying fish, cursing carters, so that grief itself seems to have become the fashion of the season, warned to be seen, and yet you watch an old porter step out of the traffic to let a black-hung mourning coach go by, and take off his hat to it, and stand with his white head bare in the drizzle till it is well past. No one watching him, nothing to gain, and you think, there it is again, the real thing, glinting inside the show like the true steel inside the polish. On the Thursday your master sends you home to your mother for 2 hours, and this is his kindness, and also, you understand, his craft. Because a boy who vanishes entirely from his mother's Sundays is a boy neighbours ask about. So you sit in the one room in the Savoy with the smell of tallow and wet wool and your mother's tea, which she brews from leaves used twice already and serves like a duchess, and she looks a long time at your hands, at the glue in the creases and the new hard places, and being a widow of the parish who has nursed and laid out half her stare, she reads hands better than a fortune-teller, and she asks nothing at all. She only says, pouring, "Your master sent coals," and you say, "Yes," and she says, "He's not a sending man, thy master," and you say, "No," and she stirs her twice-used tea and lets the whole of it lie there between you, plain as a coffin plate, unread aloud, and then she talks of the neighbours, and this, you will understand one day, is what the poor have instead of oaths, a lifetime's practice at not asking the questions whose answers cost bread. Walking back down the Strand in the last light, you pass the print shop windows, and the Queen is in all of them now, memorial sheets fresh off the stone, and you stop, because one of the prints shows her as you never saw her, and everyone else always will, young or young enough, standing, crowned and slim and steady on 2 sound feet, one hand resting light on an orb, a face serene and a little stern, the Queen of the coins and the prayers. It is a good print. It is what she was to England, and what England needed her to be, and there is not one thing in it that is a lie taken piece by piece, and the whole of it together is the greatest lie you have ever seen, and you stand there with your parcel under your arm while the lamplighter works down the street behind you, looking at the standing Queen, feeling the knowledge of the bed and the bolsters and the flannel bands pressing at the backs of your eyes, and you think, for the first time in your life, a thought that has no bottom to it, nobody will ever know, Whatever is truest about a person is exactly the part that dies with the room it happened in. Paper keeps the pose, oak keeps the measurements, the drag and click of the breath, the comb, the hand flat on her chest saying as if she were your own mother. Those are kept nowhere at all, except in whoever stood there, for exactly as long as he lasts. You are 15. You buy no print. You go back to the shop in the dusk and bar the door and feed Bramble the crust you saved him, and take up the wax and the rag and work another hour by candle on the moulding, your own moulding, the one that 3 weeks from now will try to cut a sling at the edge of a royal vault, though you do not know that yet. You only know that the edge wants one more pass of the wax, and you give it, small circles, the gilt light moving in the grain, and that is the whole of the ordinary day, and there were 12 or 14 like it, and out of such days laid one against the next like boards in a stack. The great days are built, every one of them, always, and no history will ever say so, and now one has. You should know, while your hands rest a moment, how it came to this, not the gossip, the true reckoning, the one the men in the coffee houses only half know, the one you piece together that August from Master Harben, who buried half of fashionable Westminster and heard everything, and from the plumber's whispers, and from what your own eyes saw in that room. Anne Stuart was born in 1665, the year the plague ate London, and she was never at any point in her life lucky in her body. As a small child, her eyes ran and pained her so badly, she was sent to France to a specialist, and they never fully mended. All her life she squinted at the world through a kind of watery blur, and reading tired her, and men who should have known better took the squint for stupidity. She was not stupid. Slow-spoken, yes. Shy, painfully. But she outlasted and outstubborned every brilliant man who thought he was managing her, and more than one of them learned it too late. She married George of Denmark in 1683 when she was 18, and here is the thing the wits never put in their verses. They loved each other, in an age when royal marriage was a treaty with bedding attached. Anne and her dull, kind, asthmatic Dane were faithful, fond, and happy in each other for 25 years, and their happiness was put through a mill that would have broken anyone. 17 pregnancies. Let the number stand a moment. 17 between 1684 and 1700, 16 years of it, which is to say that for 16 years that body in the bed at Kensington was almost never not carrying, recovering, or grieving. Miscarriages, stillbirths, babies who lived hours, 2 little daughters carried off by smallpox within days of each other in 1687, and one boy who lived, William, Duke of Gloucester, a bright, frail, big-headed child on whom the whole future of Protestant England was hung like weights on a nail, who drilled his little regiment of boy soldiers in the park and was cheered wherever he went. In the summer of 1700 he turned 11, danced at his own birthday, took a fever, and was dead within the week. Something in her body was at war with her own children, the physicians of a later age would say, her blood against theirs, or a slow disease of the joints and organs, the ones who study it still argue. Her own age said God's will, and she wore it. After the boy died, she wrote at the head of her letters, for the rest of her life, the words of a woman who has given up expecting kindness from heaven, and she signed herself in her closest letters, your poor unfortunate faithful Morley. Poor unfortunate. A queen of Great Britain chose that for her own name, and her body, which had been spent like an army in those 16 years, began to present its bill. Gout, they called it, though it was more and worse. gout in the feet, the knees, the hands, until walking became pain, then became rare, then, in her last years, became for practical purposes impossible. Dropsy swelled her. Eating was one of the few comforts left to a shy woman in constant pain, and the age was unkind about it in whispers, and she knew about the whispers, because a court is a machine for making sure you know. She became queen in 1702 and could not walk to her own crowning. They carried her to Westminster Abbey in a low open chair, in crimson and gold, and she managed the parts that must be stood for, standing on those ruined feet, and the crowds cheered themselves hoarse, and it was by every account a triumph, and it was also a woman being carried to work through a city that had bet money on her failure. And then, for 12 years she ruled, and here is the strangest part of the whole story. She ruled well. Hers were the years of Marlborough's great victories, Blenheim and Ramillies, names that made the bells ring till the towers swayed. Hers the union of England and Scotland into one Great Britain in 1707, done in her reign, pushed by her steady wanting of it. Hers a nation that got richer and louder and more sure of itself by the year. She touched thousands for the king's evil, sitting because sitting she could do. She attended more cabinet councils than any monarch before her and most after. She fought her ministers to draw over and over this squinting, aching, grieving woman whom every clever man underestimated on sight. The court's problem was that the nation's queen and the woman in the chair were coming apart year by year, and the gap had to be curtained. So the machinery grew. The hoisting chair at Windsor, rigged with pulleys through a cut in the floor to move her between stories, because stairs had become her enemy. They lowered and raised their sovereign through her own ceilings like a bale through a warehouse, and the men who worked the tackle were sworn, and the courtiers waiting below composed their faces and spoke of the weather. Audiences grew shorter, rooms grew smaller, the distance between the Queen and everyone else was managed to the foot. Prince George died in 1708 and took the last easy comfort out of her rooms. Her oldest, fiercest friendship, with Sarah Churchill, Duchess of Marlborough, the Mrs. Freeman to her Mrs. Morley, curdled into a quarrel so bitter that Sarah, dismissed, spent years afterward telling anyone who would listen every private thing she knew. The last years were pain and politics, and the two great parties tearing at each other over who should have the throne when she died. Her exiled Catholic half-brother or the Hanover cousins, with her own ministers plotting in both directions at once around her chair. On the 27th of July, 1714, she sat through a cabinet council marked by a shouting quarrel between her two chief ministers that went on till 2 in the morning. 3 days later she was struck down, speechless for a time, her doctors bleeding and blistering and shaving her head over 2 terrible days, while the great men of the kingdom crowded into the palace, and, in almost her last act, her hand was guided to pass the staff of Lord Treasurer to the Duke of Shrewsbury, a steady man, and the succession was made safe. One of her physicians wrote afterward that sleep was never more welcome to a weary traveller than death was to her. That is who was in the bed. That is what the room was keeping, not a scandal, a war wound, 17 campaigns of a war she never chose, worn in the flesh, and a court that had decided, rightly or wrongly, kindly or coldly, that England must never be allowed to see what its crown had cost the woman who wore it. And you, kneeling in the shavings with an auger, are building the thing that ends the concealment, because they can carry her at night, and they will. They can bury her before dawn's full light, and they will. But 8 yeomen will bend that width, and take the strain, and every soul in the abbey will see the shape under the velvet and count the bearers and understand. Master Harben says only one thing about all of it, the whole August, and he says it with his eye down a plain stroke, not looking at you. They kept her decent while she lived, he says. Now it's ours to keep her decent while she's carried. That's the whole of the trade, boy. There's no third thing. You go back to work. The plane whispers. The ribbon of oak climbs your wrist. Outside, a ballad seller is crying a mournful new song about the good queen gone to glory. Tuppence the sheet, and getting good trade for it. And neither she nor anyone who buys it knows the first true thing about the woman they are singing, and you know, and you bore the next hole and say nothing. And the saying nothing is the heaviest thing you've ever carried, heavier than lead, and you are learning to carry it, hour by hour, the way your palms learned the auger. The lead comes back to you in the second week, and the lead is its own education. It arrives at night, on a dray with the wheels muffled in sacking, which does nothing at all to muffle a dray, and only makes it sound like a dray sneaking. And 4 of the plumber's men carry the cast sections into the shop on shoulder poles, and you see grown men, big men, breathing hard and stepping small under it. And when they set the pieces down across the trestles, the trestle timber creaks a note you have never heard it make. You put your hand flat on the largest sheet, the one shaped for the great lid, and this is a feeling you will try to describe for the rest of your life and never quite manage. Lead is not cold the way iron is cold. Iron bites. Lead drinks. It pulls the warmth out of your palms slowly, patiently, and it gives nothing back. No ring, no spring, and when you press it, your hand leaves a faint, dull print in the surface, the ghost of your own touch, and something about that. Metal soft enough to remember you and heavy enough to kill you, makes the hair stand along your arms. The plumber's men do the ceiling in your shop over 3 days, because the fewer places this work travels through, the better. And so for 3 days you live inside their trade as well as your own. You learn the smell of tallow burning off a soldering iron, greasy and hot at the back of the throat. You learn the sound which surprises you, a small silken hiss and then a tick-tick-tick as each finger's breadth of seam cools, so that the whole coffin in the quiet of the evening ticks to itself like a thing with a heartbeat as the joints set. You learn to hold the iron rest steady while the old plumber works, your 2 hands wrapped in wet leather against the heat coming off the metal, your face turned side on the way he shows you, and your eyes streaming anyway, and your shoulders locking from stillness. Because the punishment in this work is not effort, but the holding still. The quarter hours of not moving, while heat crawls up the tool into your wrists, and your own sweat runs down inside your shirt, cold as the lead is cold. And you learn what the ceiling is for in words, from his ruined whisper, in pieces across the 3 days, that she was opened after death, as monarchs are, her physicians certifying what could be certified, and what they found was ruin, and the less said the better, that she was embalmed and wrapped and seared, waxcloth smoothed against her by women whose names no one will ever write down, that in August, above all months, the wooden coffin alone cannot be trusted to hold what a body becomes, and the lead is the true vessel, the wood inside it her last bed, and the oak outside it her last state, and the solder seam, his seam run true around the hole with not a pinhole in it, is the actual physical keeping of the promise the whole funeral makes, that she will lie decent in that vault until the world ends. Kings has laid in my seams 60 year, he whispers, and not one has ever complained of the work. And he laughs his ruined laugh at his own old joke, which you can tell he has made over every royal seam of his life, and you laugh too. And the laughing feels like the first full breath you have taken since the knock on the door. And that is the other thing you learn that week, that men who do this work joke over it not because they do not feel it, but because the joke is a handle, and everything is easier to carry with a handle. The outer coffin, the state coffin, the one the world will see, comes together in the 3rd week, and now other sworn hands pass through the shop in 1s and 2s. The upholders' men with the purple velvet, which arrives rolled in canvas and unrolls across the bench like a slab of dark water, so deep a purple it is nearly black until candlelight moves on it, and the nap catches and it breathes colour. You're allowed to touch it once with washed hands, and your split glue-webbed fingertips catch on the pile like burrs on fleece, and you snatch your hand back ashamed. The velvet is stretched and folded and set with rows of gilt nails, and driving gilt nails is your work for 2 whole days, each nail started through velvet without bruising the pile, seated with a leather-faced hammer, tap, 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 1,000 small, identical prayers, until the rhythm follows you onto the pallet at night and you dream in taps. The great engraved plate comes, wrapped in flannel, with her name and titles and the years of her age and reign cut deep and blacked. Anna, by the grace of God, Queen of Great Britain, France and Ireland, and you hold the screws for the man who fixes it and read the words upside down. And France makes you blink until Master Harben tells you quietly that the kings of England have claimed France on their plates and their coins these 300 years, and never mind the truth of it. The dead travel under their full style, and the handles, 8 of them, gilt, massy, each backed inside the oak with iron plates you fitted yourself, because the handles are where 700's weight meets human hands, and every one of them is proved before it goes on, hung with test weights off a beam, twice the burden it should ever bear, while Master Harben stands watching the joint with his arms folded and his jaw set, and you stand beside him understanding that he is seeing a stair in the North Country, long ago, and a bottom board failing, and that some part of this man has spent his whole working life making sure that story never happens again to anyone, and it is not going to happen to his queen. On the last evening before she is moved from Kensington, when the work is done and waxed and the shop swept, and the great dark shape stands finished on its trestles, filling the middle of the room like a fallen piece of night, Master Harben does something strange. He sends you to bed on your pallet and banks the fire, and then instead of going up to his own chamber, he fetches a stool and sits by the coffin with a single candle, the way a man sits up with the dead, though it is empty, and Bramble goes and lies across his feet instead of yours, and that is how you fall asleep the last night. The tick of cooling nothing, the dog's slow breathing, your master's still shadow thrown huge up the wall, keeping awake for a box. You understand it years later. It was the only funeral he would get to attend. Men like him build the state and are not invited to it. So he made his own, 1 candle, 1 dog, 1 boy asleep in the shavings, and if you had been braver, you would have gotten up and sat with him, and you will be sorry all your life that you did not. She is moved from Kensington to Westminster by night, as royalty is moved, and her coffin lies in the Prince's chamber by the House of Lords while the Abbey is made ready, and London, which has been told nothing, knows everything, and knows nothing at once. The prints are already out. The Queen borne up by angels, the nation weeping, all of it decorous, all of it a face at the end of a room. The wagering men have gone quiet or gone unsatisfied. Mr. Pratt does not come again, and you look for him at the conduit every day, and the day you finally stop looking is a better day than most. And then it is the 24th of August, and the funeral is at night, and you are told, to your astonishment, that you are going, not as a mourner, never that, but the great machine wants its makers within reach until the last moment, in case a handle, a hinge, a nail, anything, should want a true hand at short notice. And so a warrant passes and words are spoken, and on the evening of the 24th of August, 1714, Thomas Cole, apprentice, walks with his master through streets going dark toward Westminster Abbey, with a leather roll of tools under his arm, screwdriver, leather-faced hammer, wax, spare gilt nails, like a surgeon called to stand at the edge of a battle, and the abbey rises up ahead of you against the last of the light, and every window of it is beginning to glow. 2 nights before the funeral, you see her again. Not her. You never see her again. Her coffin, which by now amounts in your heart to nearly the same thing. It happens because the machine wants a fitting. The outer coffin, your work, has gone by night to Westminster days since, and the sealed lead with the Queen inside it has come by night from Kensington, and in the Prince's chamber, by candlelight, behind locked doors, the one must be married into the other, lowered and bedded and secured, and the marrying wants the makers. So a message comes, and you and Master Harben put on black and go, through the night streets, past the sentries doubled at every turning of the palace yards, giving a word to men with halberds who look through you as they let you by, and into a room hung entirely in black baize, walls and windows and all, so that the candles burn in a kind of velvet nowhere, and the air is close and smells of wax, black cloth, and the cold stone breath of the old palace. And there, on trestles draped to the floor, under the eyes of an officer of the wardrobe and 2 silent yeomen, you do the last handling. The lead comes to the oak in a cradle of slings, eased by inches, 6 men breathing in each other's ears, down, down, your own voice among the low voices, hold, left, hold, down, and when she beds home into the shell you built, into the bottom you clenched, there is a sound, soft, final, wood-receiving weight it was made for, a sound like a great door closing in another house, and every man in the room stands still for a moment without agreeing to. Then the securing, which is yours. The screws home through the prepared blocks, your hands doing in this candle dark, watched by officers, the same motions they have done 100 times in the plain daylight of the shop, and there is a strange steadiness in that. The hands do not know they are in a palace. The hands know pitch of thread and seat of head. Turn and feel, and they carry you through it like old horses that know the road home. You wax the last screw, you wipe the head, you step back, and for the space of perhaps a minute, while the officer writes and the yeomen wait and Master Harben confers in a murmur, you stand alone at the coffin side with your hand resting flat on the velvet, which no order forbade, and under your palm is the nap of the pile and the cold coming up through it from the lead beneath, and under the lead the cerecloth, and under all her, the small round face, the swollen shining hands, the poor unfortunate faithful lady herself, 6 inches and 3 worlds from your fingers, and you find you are speaking to her in your head, easy as speaking to Bramble, telling her the plain shop truths, that the oak is sound, that the seams are true, that the handles are proved to twice the burden, that the men who will carry her are the biggest in the guard, and have been practising, madam, actually practising, with a made-up weight of sand and lead in the empty hours of the night, so that nothing shall jolt you, and that everything that hands can do has been done, and that the rest is God's. The practising is true, by the way. You have it from the yeoman with the grey moustaches while you wait afterward in the passage, a man built like a gate, who tells you in an undertone, because tongues loosen at midnight even under oaths, that the bearing party has walked its route twice by night with a proofing load on the shoulder poles, up the steps, through the doors, every turning, and that the width is, he says, begging your pardon as if the width were somehow your fault or your credit, the very devil, not the weight alone, the width. A man cannot get his shoulder fairly under her, but must bear part on the arms, and the arms tire treacherous fast, and so the reliefs are doubled and the paces counted, and there are men told off to walk alongside with their hands hovering an inch under the rails the whole way, hands that will appear in no account and no engraving, hovering an inch under the burden for a mile of slow marching just in case. Just in case. You will think of those hovering hands sometimes for the rest of your life. Whenever anyone speaks of the state as if it were a cold machine, you will think, it is hands. It was always hands, all the way down. The evening before the funeral itself, London comes to the doors. There is no general lying in state for the crowds, not for this queen. The plans were pared quiet, but a city always knows, and by dusk on the 23rd the streets about the old palace are filling with people who have simply come to be near, in their blacks and their bands, standing in the fine drizzle with nothing to see but sentries and hung windows, and staying anyway, hundreds of them, then more, talking in the low voice people use in a sick house, buying nothing though the pie men work the edges, just standing, the way people will stand near a great thing they cannot enter, warming themselves at the mere nearness. You pass among them on a last errand and hear her spoken of on every side, and it is the strangest thing. Everyone owns her. A carter's wife tells how the Queen touched her sister's boy for the evil in the year 7, touched him with her own hand, and he mended, whatever the surgeons say now. An old dissenting weaver, who by right should love her not at all, allows that she paid the parson's money out of her own purse, Queen Anne's bounty they call it, and that a hand that open is rare enough in the great. A soldier's widow says simply that the wars are over, and the Queen made the peace, and her man died 2 years too soon to see it, and dabs her eyes with a wrist, and the woman next to her, a stranger, takes her arm. Nobody in the whole drizzling crowd knows her, everybody knew her. That is what a monarch is, you begin to see. Not the person whom the court kept locked away even from herself at the end, but the common possession, the something shared, stitched out of coins and prayers and touched children and peace. And it is real as oak, even though the poor lady who had to carry the weight of being it could barely at the end carry her own body across a room. You go back to the shop through the wet, and sleep your last night on the pallet, and in the morning, the 24th, Master Harburn shaves with more than usual care, and Mrs. Harburn brushes both your coats till the black shows blacker, and gives you each a sprig of dried rosemary, for remembrance to carry in the pocket, hers being an older religion of funerals than any wardrobe warrant, and you eat what you can, which is little, and the day goes over you slow and strange like weather. And then it is evening, and the tools are rolled, and the torches are being lit all down the route as you walk, gold blooming point by point along the darkening street the way the year's first stars come out, and the Abbey rises up ahead of you against the last of the light, and every window of it is beginning to glow. Nobody who was not there can be made to understand what the royal funeral by night actually is, so let us go slowly, because you have the whole night, and so do we. It is dark by the time the procession forms, and the dark is the point. The court buries its own after sunset. It is the old custom for princes, part piety, part privacy, and tonight privacy is carrying more than its share. The way from the Palace of Westminster to the Abbey is lined with soldiers standing so still that at first you take some of them for posts, and between and above them torches and flambeaux, hundreds upon hundreds, so that the whole route is a river of unsteady gold running through a black city, and the smell of it lies over everything. Pitch smoke, hot resin, singed air, a smell like a city burning very slowly and very politely. Ash flakes drift and settle on shoulders, on hats, on the black cloth that is everywhere, and everyone is faintly freckled with grey before the night is done. You and Master Harburn are put where the machine wants you, in the shadow of the great door by the vestry side, out of the way, with your tools, and from there you see it come. Sound first, muffled drums far off, a heartbeat under blankets getting nearer for longer than seems possible. Then the head of the procession, heralds in their stiff bright tabards, the only colour in the world tonight, moving at the pace the drums allow, which is barely a pace at all. Officers with white staves, peers in mourning cloaks, 2 and 2, an astonishing quantity of lords, old men some of them, walking the slow walk with their faces held, the great officers, and then the chariot with the coffin under its purple pall and its nodding black plumes drawn slow. The horses hung to the ground in black velvet, so they look like moving pieces of the night, with breath steaming out of them, and on the pall, catching every torch as it passes, the glint of the gilt nails you drove with a leather hammer. Tap, 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 1,000 of them answering the fire, and you hear it move through the crowd as the chariot passes, the thing the court knew would come and built a night around. A sound that is not quite a gasp and not quite a murmur, a kind of soft turning over of thousands of people noticing at once. Because the pall drapes, but it drapes over a shape, and the shape is the shape, and there is no drapery in England wide enough to make that width read as anything but what it is. You hear one voice, a woman's, low, not mocking at all, say, clear in the hush, God a mercy, the poor soul, and that, more than anything in the whole month, tells you the secret has ended, not with laughter, not with a wager and men snigger, with pity, moving through a torchlit crowd like wind over wheat, which is perhaps what the poor lady could have had from her people all along, if the court had ever trusted them with the truth. Or perhaps not. You are 15. You do not have to decide what England would have done. You only have to watch and hold the tool roll and swallow. Inside, the Abbey is another world again. You've been inside it twice in your life before, gawping at tombs on idle Sundays. Tonight it is lit like no building you've ever seen, wax candles in the hundreds, whole constellations of them banked in the choir and around the hearse, and the light goes up and gives out long before the roof, so that the service happens in a bowl of gold under a black nothing, and the organ comes down out of that nothing like weather. Henry Purcell's music for Queen Mary's funeral 20 years before is a thing men still speak of. Tonight the Abbey's own men make a sound fit to stand beside it, and when the choir lays the first line of the burial sentences into the air, I am the resurrection and the life. One treble voice riding on top like a light on dark water, you feel it in the bones of your face, and the tears come down without asking, and you let them, because in this crowd, tonight, At last, everyone's face is wet and nobody's is watched. The chief mourner is a duchess with a great train, supported by lords because the new king is not yet even in England. George is still on his slow road from Hanover and will not land for weeks, so Great Britain buries one sovereign with the next one absent in the sole charge. You think suddenly of ceremony itself, of the machine, of ushers and heralds and joiners, as if the crown tonight is actually being carried by the hundreds of sworn nobodies who make the thing go. It is a thought too big for you, and you put it down. What you cannot put down, what you watch the way a man watches his own child on a rooftop, is the bearing. The yeomen of the guard carry her, more of them than any coffin you ever saw carried. Taking her weight on their shoulders with the handles you proved manned besides, and even so, even with all that strength arranged and drilled, you see at the moment they take the strain, the almost squat, the settle, the two heartbeats of stillness while every man finds the burden, faces going carefully to stone, 700 weight and a shape no bearer has ever practised. Wider than a coffin has any right to be, wanting to roll and yaw between them with every step, and they move it the way heavy things must be moved, in a slow sea swell of small steps, gathered and released, down the choir toward the south aisle of Henry VII's chapel, toward the vault where her husband waits, and her sister Mary and William, and where the stone has been taken up, and the shored mouth of the dark stands open in the floor with a scaffold of timber and tackle over it, because you do not lower 700 weight into the earth on ropes held in hands. You lower it on windlass and fall, iron and oak and geometry, rigged by men who were sworn the same week you were. And it is there, at the vault's edge, in the closest press of candles and clergy and the highest persons in the realm, that the night comes for you. It happens quietly, the way real disasters begin. The coffin is landed on the transoms over the vault mouth, dead slow, and the bearers stand down by files, and the tackle men move in to sling her, and Master Harben, who has edged the two of you nearer through the whole approach, with the patient sideways trade. Craft of a man who has haunted 100 funerals goes suddenly still beside you, and his hand closes on your arm hard enough to bruise. "The near sling," he says, under the anthem, in a voice you feel more than hear. "Look at the near sling." You look. The slings are broad woven bands, passed under the coffin at the balance points your own battens mark. And the near one, in being drawn under, has ridden over its wooden guide and lies half across the proud edge of the lower moulding. Your moulding, oak you shaped with your own plane, and it is bearing where nothing was ever meant to bear, on a sharp-shouldered edge, and when the windlass takes the weight, the band will draw across that edge like a rope over a knife's back, and it may hold, and it may not. And if it does not, then before the assembled crown, mitres, and blood of Great Britain, the coffin of Queen Anne will go down into her family's vault, not lowered but dropped. One corner first, 700 weight onto stone and lead and the dead, and the sound it would make is a sound you can already hear, and will hear sometimes all your life in the moment before sleep, and no velvet, no anthem, no oath will ever unhappen it. There is no time to send word up any proper channel. The tackle men are at their marks. The dean's voice is moving through the committal. Master Harben looks at the sling and at the press of great persons between here and there, and at his own broad self, and then he looks at you, 15 years old, slight, quick, in decent black with washed hands, and he takes the wax and the folded leather pad out of the tool roll and puts them into those hands, and he says the last order of your apprenticeship that matters. 4 words, level as a bench. Go and be invisible, and you go. Out of the shadow, into the candlelight, into the smell of wax and incense and great person's civet, moving the way he taught you to move in houses of grief, at the pace of the place, eyes down, a servant shape, a nothing shape, past a bishop's sleeve close enough to count its buttons, and no one stops you, because a boy in black moving calmly at a funeral is furniture, and you kneel at the vault's shored edge with the black breathing up cold at you from below, cold and old, earth and stone and the faint mineral staleness of the long dead, and with 2 fingers you lift the sling's edge, and it is like lifting a saddle girth with the horse already leaning on it, and you slide the leather pad flat over the moulding's shoulder. Seat it with the wax press, count 2. Feel the band settle its whole broad honest breadth onto the pad, onto safety, onto your own good work, protecting your own good work, and you draw your hands back, and you stand. And you step backward into the shadow of a pier, and the windlass turns, and the anthem holds its long note, and the coffin of Queen Anne goes down smooth as evening, slow as mercy, true as a plumb line, into the dark where her people are, and not one soul in that whole golden company ever knows that anything happened at all. Witches, you understand at last, standing there shaking with your heart going like the muffled drums, the entire meaning of your trade, and of the woman in the vault's whole reign, and maybe of most human decency altogether. The disaster that does not happen, the care nobody sees, the held weight, the kept secret, the padded edge, the combed hair, the seam without a pinhole, the whole invisible architecture of gentleness that the world stands on and never once notices, because when it works there is nothing to notice. There is only a queen going down gently to her rest. Earth is cast. The white staves of her household officers are broken over the vault. Cracked across the knee one by one, the little dry snap shockingly loud, and thrown down onto the coffin, the old sign that her service is ended and her servants are released, and at each snap you flinch as if it were your own spine, because you know now what it cost to serve a body like hers, and how many hands did it, and how few will ever be thanked. And then it is over. It is simply, suddenly over, the way the largest things end. The music stops. The great persons turn. The machine begins to disassemble itself, and the stone will be let down over the vault, and the candles will be snuffed by yawning vergers, and outside the torches are burning down to stubs all along the emptying route, and London is going to bed, and tomorrow the sun will rise on a country with a German king on the road, and a dead queen underfoot, and no visible sign anywhere that the world has hinged. Master Harben finds you by the pier. He does not embrace you. He is not a man who ever learned how. He takes the tool roll from under your arm, and he looks at you for a long moment in the dying gold light, and what he says is, "Whose work was that moulding?" "Mine, master." "And whose work was the pad?" "Mine, master." "Then you've made and mended in one night at the crowning of the trade, which is more than I had done at 50. He settles his hat. "And no one will ever know it, and if you ever tell them, you'll be flogged. Come home, Thomas." And you walk home together through streets full of torch smoke and falling ash, past soldiers standing down and link boys touting the last fares of the night, and neither of you says one word more, and it is the finest conversation of your life. The strange weeks after are the part nobody ever asks about, and they are the part that teaches you the most. Because a secret, when it dies, does not die all at once, cleanly, like a candle pinched, It rots outward, slowly, through 1,000 suppers. Within a week of the funeral, you begin to hear it coming back to you in the street, changed, grown, wearing clothes you never put on it. A porter at the conduit says he had it from a yeoman's brother that the Queen's coffin was almost square, and the cookmaid's eyes go round. A ballad appears, then another, mostly pious, one or two cruel, and Master Harben buys the cruel one off the seller's whole stack, every sheet, pays her without haggling, and feeds them to the glue fire one at a time with the tongs, saying nothing, and you stand beside him and watch the paper flare and curl and understand that this too is the trade, hopeless as it is. You cannot buy every sheet in London, and next week there will be more, but man does what his hands can reach, almost square. You hear the words themselves, your own private, terrible knowledge, spoken casually across a tavern doorway by a man who was nowhere near any of it, and the feeling is like seeing your own coat on a stranger. The number will never be public. No plate, no gazette will print her width, but the shape has escaped, exactly as the men with the seals always knew it must, out through the eyes of bearers and vergers and crowds, and now it belongs to everyone, and everyone tells it a little differently. And here is the thing that surprises you and keeps surprising you all autumn. Mostly, London is not cruel with it. The wits are, a little. The wagering men presumably settle their filthy money, but the general voice of the street, when it says almost square, says it the way the woman at the torchlit rail said, poor soul. 17 children, the street says, wrongly counting, rightly meaning, and not one lived? Think of it. And her legs bad all those years, and she never once complained in public, did she? A good queen, the street decides, roughly, imprecisely, over its ale, a good dull, kind, unlucky queen, and the shape of the coffin becomes, in the mouths of ordinary people, not a scandal at all, but the proof of what she bore. The court hid her body for 7 years because it did not trust England to pity her. England, given the plain truth in oak at last, pities her. You do not know what to do with that. You are not sure the court would know either. In October you see the other end of the great machine, the bright end, and it completes something in you. The new king is crowned on the 20th of October 1714 at the Abbey, your Abbey as you have privately come to hold it, and this time there are no warrants and no tool rolls. This time you are simply London, one boy in a crowd of tens of thousands, given the day off like half the city, wedged with Ned the journeyman against a barrier rail in the cold bright morning with the smell of the crowd around you, ale and onions and damp wool, and the gunpowder tang drifting from the park where they are proving the salutes. And it is glorious, and it is loud, and it is everything the August night was not. Full day, full colour, the heralds' tabards blazing, the peeresses with their coronets carried before them, the trumpets shouting silver off the stone, the way roaring down its whole length when the canopy passes, and the guns going off from the tower in rolling thunder you feel through the soles of your feet, and the conduits, they say, running wine in the city, and bonfires building on every corner before the procession is even done. And you stand in the middle of the joy, which is real and paid for and politic, all three at once, and you find you're watching it with a coffin-maker's eyes, and cannot stop. You watch the crown itself go by on its cushion, and think of the weight of things and the hands under them. You watch the new king, a stiff figure in ermine, 54 years old, borne along inside the machine exactly as she was born, and you think, they have put him in it now. The chair, the paint, the managed distances, the sworn nobodies, the whole apparatus that carried her, has simply been dusted and adjusted and set going again around a new body, and it will carry him as it carried her and use him up as it used her up. More gently, perhaps. He has his health, but it will have him in the end. It has everyone, and someday, 13 years from now, though you cannot know the number, some other master and some other boy will get a knock on a shutter at 6 in the morning on his account. And here is the thing you could not have understood in July and cannot now unknow in October. You feel for him. A German stranger you never chose, cheered by a city that would have cheered his rival nearly as loud if the dice had fallen otherwise. A man who from this day forward will never again hear a wholly honest word or eat a wholly private meal, and you, a nobody at a rail with onion breath on both sides of you, are perhaps the only soul in the crowd pitying the king at his own coronation, because you are perhaps the only soul at the rail who has knelt at the other door of the palace, the low one, the one they carry you out through. It makes you strange. You know it makes you strange. 15 years old and you've already been backstage of the world, and no one comes back from backstage all the way. Ned buys you ale after, in a tavern so packed the drink travels overhead hand to hand, and the toasts go up, King George, and you drink them honestly, and then Ned, wiping his mouth, says quietly under the roar, not looking at you, "Queen Anne, God rest her," and you say, "God rest her," and you touch pots, just the two of you, in the middle of the coronation of her successor, and Ned still asks nothing, and never will, and that small clink of pewter in the roaring room is her whole funeral feast as far as the common world is concerned, and it is enough, and you go out into the evening where the bonfires are catching all down the street, gold blooming point by point in the dusk exactly the way the torches bloomed in August, and you stand a moment in the smoke and the light, and the two nights lie over each other in your sight like two panes of glass. The burying and the crowning, the same machine, the same fires, the same crowd, and you understand at last, bone deep, what your trade has been trying to teach you all along, that the crown never dies, only the neck that bears it, that the show goes on because it must, and that somewhere under every triumph, every bonfire, every anthem, there is always, always a plain box of true oak in the dark, holding, which is the actual foundation of everything and always was. You're never entirely young again after that autumn. It is a fair trade. Most people give their youth away for nothing and get no secret in return. Mr. Pratt you see exactly once more in October across the width of the Strand, and he sees you, and there is a moment, and then he touches his hat to you gravely, one professional to another, and turns down a side lane, and that is the end of Mr. Pratt, whoever he was, and you find, walking on, that you are grinning like a fool at nothing, because whatever wager his gentleman laid, you were not the one who settled it. The new king lands at Greenwich in the September fog, and makes his entry into London, and the crowds turn out for him with flags and bells, because crowds always do. And he is a stiff, private, 54-year-old German who speaks little English, and looks at his new kingdom the way a man looks at a horse he's been given and not asked for. And within the year there will be risings in Scotland for the Pretender and heads on Temple Bar. But that is another winter's story. What matters in your story is smaller. The wardrobe pays its bills, slowly, the way great offices pay, and Master Harben's warrant with the seals goes into the strongbox forever, never once shown, never once boasted of, and the shop takes down its shutters and buries aldermen and mercers' wives again as if the whole of August had happened to some other shop, except for three things. The first is Ned the journeyman, who came back to his bench the week after the funeral and looked long at the fresh sawdust and the moved trestles and the fine oak offcuts too wide for any common work, and being a Londoner to the marrow of him, understood the whole of it in one slow look around the room, and said nothing then, and has said nothing since, not in any tavern, not once in all the years, which teaches you the last lesson of that year, that you had him wrong, and that the difference between a man who talks and a man who keeps faith is not always where a boy of 15 draws it. The second is your hands. The splinter works out of your thumb in September. Finally, a tiny black splinter of Kensington gravel oak or bench oak. You will never know which, leaving a pale fleck of scar you will carry to your grave, and the auger callus fades by Christmas, and the amber webbing of glue scrubs away. But something in the hands themselves does not go back. Master Harbour notices it before you do. He starts giving you finer work, veneer, moulding, the proving of joints, and one evening in November, watching you draw up a dovetail, he says, in the tone of a man remarking on the weather, "You've a made pair of hands now," and goes back to his supper, and you go out into the yard afterward and stand in the cold, flexing your fingers open and shut in the dark, ridiculously happy, breath smoking, the whole sky over the yard hard with stars. And the third is the nail, because on the night of the funeral, when he took back the tool roll, one spare gilt nail had worked through a seam in the leather into the lining, and you found it a week later, a single gilded coffin nail, bright as the day you would have driven it, and you knew you should return it to stock. A farthing's worth of tin and gilt, and you did not. You kept it. You have no defence. You bored a hole through nothing. You drilled no hole at all. You simply wrapped it in a scrap of the flannel. The great plate came in and sewed it into the corner of your waistcoat lining with waxed thread, apprentice neat, and there it stayed, and there its successors stayed, moved by your own hands from waistcoat to waistcoat down all the years of your life, your one thing, the only object in the world that proved to you, on the nights when the whole of that August felt like something you had dreamed, that a boy with a leather pad once knelt at the open mouth of a royal vault, with all England singing over his head, and that the disaster did not happen. Winter comes. The water butt skins with ice, and you break it with your fist the way you did last winter, and the winter before, and the cold gets into the split places on your knuckles the same as ever, and the shop smells of oak and glue and dog and snow-damp wool, and the work goes on. A wine merchant. A child, which is the work that never gets easier and never should. An old countess whose steward tries to beat down the price of elm and gets Master Harbin's flattest look. The bells ring in the new year, 1715, the first full year of King George, and the coffee houses have moved on to the Jacobites and the price of stocks, and Queen Anne slips out of the daily talk the way the dead do, a little more each month, until she's a plate on the coinage and style of furniture, and a good dull rain that people are already beginning to miss without noticing they miss it. But you go back. That is your secret ritual, that first winter and for years after. On an idle Sunday now and then you walk to the Abbey, in at the great door with the gawpers and the country cousins, and you make your slow way east, as if you cared about the tombs of crusaders, and you come to the south aisle of Henry VII's chapel, and you stand over the plain stone, and under your feet, 12 feet down in the dark you once felt, breathing on your face, she lies in your work, in the plumber's true seam, in your battens and your clenched bottom and your proved joints, in oak that was old under Elizabeth, next to the husband she loved and the sister she quarrelled with, and the little son who was going to be everything. There is no great monument. There never will be one. The age is done with mounded marble queens, and perhaps that is fitting for her, who hated show and bore so much in private. Just the stone and the names and people's feet passing all day, most of them never looking down. You look down, you stand a minute. You think every time some version of the same clumsy boy's prayer, which is not really a prayer at all, only a report. Holding, madam. All true and holding. And then you put your hat on and go home to your dinner, and no one in the whole moving crowd of the Abbey ever once wonders what the young joiner was looking at, which is exactly as it should be. One more night from that first winter, because it belongs to the story, though it took you years to understand how. It is late in January 1715, a black iron night with the wind working the shutters, and you are asleep in your new dignity of a proper bed in the garret, the pallet nights being done with, when Bramble sets to barking downstairs, which Bramble never does, being deaf as the bench, and you are down the ladder with your heart in your throat before your head is awake, sure of thieves, and it is not thieves, it is the fire. A parcel of shavings raked too near the banked coals at closing. Your rake, your closing, has crept alight, and a lazy rope of smoke is standing in the middle of the workshop, and the first small flames are licking at the sweepings under the end of the timber rack, under the stacked oak, under the whole dry combustible fortune and future of the house. What you learn about yourself in the next 2 minutes you will keep forever. You do not shout. You will wonder at that later. The shout was in your chest, and something older than you held it. Because a shout wakes the street, and a woken street means chaos, and chaos burns houses. You take the water butt's leather bucket and the small hearth pail, and you drown the sweepings first, the flame itself. 3 throws, the hiss and the stink of it enormous in the dark, then the rack's leg, then the floor around, working by firelight that dies as you work until you are working by nothing, by feel, sloshing the dark where the red had been. And then Master Harben is there in his shirt with a candle, and the two of you rake the whole hearth corner apart and wet it down to the brick, and stand in the cold and the steam and the bitter, wet char smell, not speaking, watching for a spark's return like cats at a hole, the better part of an hour. The shop is saved. The damage is a scorched floorboard and a stink that haunts a fortnight. And when it is certain, when the corner has been raked a 3rd time and the brick is cold under his palm, Master Harben straightens up and looks at you, sooted, soaked, shaking now that it is over, 15 years old in a scorched nightshirt, and he does not thank you, and he does not comfort you. He says, "Whose rake left shavings by the coals?" "Mine, master." "And whose hand drowned them?" "Mine, master." "So." He nods slowly, the candle guttering shadows up his face. "Then you're even with the night. But hear me, Thomas, for this is the whole catechism of this house, and I'll say it the once. Any fool can be the hand that mends. The trade is to be the hand that needn't. She lies safe under stone now, Our Lady. No thanks to fire. But this shop is my vault, and every house we furnish is somebody's, and the man who is careless at closing has no business being brave at midnight. Wash, sleep, and rake wide of the coals while you live. Rake wide of the coals while you live. You will say it to Dick Fenner one day, and he to his boys, and it will go down the years hand over hand like the honey-coloured auger handle, and not one of the boys who receives it will know it was minted at 2 in the morning in January 1715, by a man in his shirt beside a drowned fire 3 months after he buried a queen. That is how the sayings of old masters are made. Every one of them was a night like that once. Every proverb was a fright first. You climb back to the garret. You do not sleep for a long while. You lie listening to the wind and the settling ticks of the saved house, and your mind, unbidden, goes where it goes all that winter when the lights are out, down the dark of the vault, along the true seams, and you think with a fierce shamed tenderness you could not confess to any living soul. At least you are past all fires now, madam. Frost nor flame nor careless boys can reach you where the work holds. Sleep sound, and whether that thought is a prayer or an impertinence you have never yet decided, 65 years old at your window with the needle in your hand, and you suspect now it was both, and that most of the truest things are. The years do what years do. Let them run a little, the way they actually ran, not in great leaps, but in the small change of days. You finish your apprenticeship in the spring of 1719, 7 years served, and stand in the hall of the joiners' company in a coat your mother sat up 3 nights altering, and are made free of the company and of the city of London, which is to say you become, at 20, legally a man, with the right to work for wages, to marry, to open a shop of your own some day, and the clerk who enters your name in the great book has ink on his fingers and a cold in his head, and sniffs all the way through the most important sentence anyone has ever written about you. That is how the great days actually go. You will learn to love that about them. You stay with Master Harben as his journeyman, because London is full of shops, but not full of men like him, and the work deepens. He's past 60 now, and his knee is bad in the mornings, and without one word ever being said about it, the heavy end of everything migrates to you. The timber yard haggling, the ladder work, the lifting, the kneeling. You notice one January that you've begun setting the glue pot lower on its hook so he need not reach, and that he has noticed you doing it and has let it pass unremarked. And you understand that this is what it looks like when respect and pity learn to wear the same coat, and that some day some boy will quietly lower a hook for you. He takes new apprentices, and the first of them, a scared, clever, undersized boy called Dick Fenner, with a stammer that vanishes entirely when his hands are busy, becomes yours to teach in everything but name. And teaching, you discover, is the strangest of the trades hidden inside your trade. You hear Master Harben's words come out of your own mouth, tone and all. Lead forgives nothing. The best work goes into the dark. Boys who hide cracks bury families. You watch Dick suck a splinter out of his thumb pad, and you're 15 again for one whole heartbeat, standing at the bench with a knock rattling the shutter pins. You teach him the auger, and watch his palms blister and harden on the same handle that hardened yours, the ash gone the colour of honey now with 30 years of hands, and there is a continuity in that smooth wood, hand over hand down the years, older than any of you and quieter, that comforts you in a way you never find words for. What you do not teach him, what you never tell him or anyone, is August 1714. The oath holds. But once, when he is 17 and you are 25, you take him with you to a funeral your shop has furnished at St. Margaret's, hard by the Abbey, and afterward, on the walk home, you steer him in through the great door, casually, as if the thought had just occurred, and you walk him the long way round, and you stop casually at a plain stone in the south aisle of Henry VII's chapel, and you let the silence sit until he reads the names. Queen Anne lies there, you say, and her husband, and her sister, and her son. No monument you see, only the work below, that nobody sees. Remember that, when you're minded to skimp a bottom board because it's hidden. Everything we do is hidden. That's not the hardship of the trade, Dick. That's the honour of it. He nods, solemn as a church, understanding perhaps a quarter of it, which is the correct amount at 17. And you put your hats on and go home, and your fingers find through the waistcoat cloth, without your asking them to, a small hard shape in the corner of the lining, and press it once, and let it go. You marry in 1722. Her name is Susanna, and she is a mercer's daughter from Ludgate Hill who first spoke to you across a counter about the difference between Genoa and Lyons velvet, and was so plainly, laughingly, better informed than you that you went back the next week with an invented errand, and the week after with a worse one, and she let you keep inventing errands until the spring. She has quick brown eyes and chilblains every winter, and no illusions about the trade she's marrying into. Her own father was laid out in her parlour when she was 12, and she says, on the evening you finally tell her what your work is at its heart, that a man who is gentle with the dead is a safe wager to be gentle with the living, and she is not wrong often, and she is not wrong then. You tell her about August 1714 on the third night of your marriage, all of it. The knock, the room, the smell of burnt vinegar, the ivory comb with the missing teeth, the drag and click of the breathing, Mr. Pratt at the conduit, the sling at the vault's edge. You had not planned to. The oath was the oath. But it comes out of you in the dark like the splinter came out of your thumb, in its own time, because it was always going to, because a man cannot be married to a kept secret and a wife at once. And she listens the whole way through without once interrupting, holding your hand in both of hers, and at the end she's quiet a long time, and then she says the thing you have somehow needed someone to say for 8 years. That poor lady, and that poor boy. And you realise no one in all of it, yourself included, had ever once spared a thought for the boy. And you cry, 23 years old, master of your craft, in your own bed, in your own lodgings, the way you did not let yourself cry walking out of Kensington with wet cheeks in the grey morning light, and Susanna holds on. And after that night the secret weighs what a keepsake weighs, and no more, and you understand that this is what marriage is actually for, and no one had told you that either. Master Harburn dies in the January of 1728, 71 years old, in his bed, of nothing but the accumulated Januaries, with Bramble's successor, a dog just as deaf across his feet. He has left instructions, of course, written years before, precise as a warrant. The timber named, boards he set aside himself, you know the ones, the joints specified, and the work to be done, the paper says, by T. Cole and none other, and no velvet and no gilt, plain wax and a plain plate. For, the paper says, in his own square upright hand, the work will speak. So you build your master's coffin in his own shop, at his own bench, with Dick planing beside you, and both of you stopping every little while because the eyes must be clear for fine work, and it is the finest thing you have ever made. And it goes into the dark at St. Martin's on his sleeting Thursday under the hands of 6 joiners of the company, level as water, and the work speaks, and what it says is everything you have not the words for, then or now. You take the shop. It was arranged years since, in the quiet way he arranged things. The widow keeps her portion and her rooms above her life, and Cole, late Harburn, goes over the door in gold-leafed letters that feel like wearing another man's coat for the first year and like your own name ever after. Susanna keeps the books far better than you would, and scolds the timber merchants far better than you could. Children come. You will not put them through the counting Queen Anne endured, so let it be said simply that some live and some do not, and that on the worst mornings of your life you are glad, with a black, private, unspeakable gladness, that at least the smallest coffins your shop makes in those years are made by your own hands and no strangers. Gently, gently, the best work into the dark, and the trade carries you, the way he always said it would, through the South Sea madness, when half your customers are ruined on paper and the funerals go strangely quiet and cheap for 2 years, through the winters, through King George I dying on his travels in 1727 in his own Hanover, far from the kingdom that never much warmed to him nor he to it, and George II coming in with a new coronation and new anthems, Mr. Handel's, that men whistle in the street for months, through all of it, the shop, the bench, the smell of oak, the seasons of the dead, which have their tides like the river, the old in January, the fevers in August, always August, and every August without fail, somewhere in the middle of the month, a particular evening light comes down the lane the colour of torch gold, and you stand in the shop door with your pipe, and you are 15, and the drums are coming. Grow old now. It does not hurt as much as you fear, most of it. It is 1764 when this last evening finds you, and you are 65, which by the arithmetic of your street makes you an ancient, and by your own arithmetic makes you a man with a bad left knee, a full head of white hair your granddaughters are vain of on your behalf, and 50 years, this very August since the knock on the shutter, half a century. The apprentices you trained have apprentices. Dick Fenner, stammer and all, has had his own shop in Suffolk these 30 years and buries the borough as honestly as any man alive. The sign over your door says Coal and Son now, and the Son is worth 2 of you at the bench, though you would be flogged before you told him so on a working day. The world you were young in has been quietly carried out piece by piece, the way worlds are. The link boys give way street by street to oil lamps on posts, so that London at night is no longer the ocean of black it was, and children now will never know what darkness a city can hold, and mostly that is gain. The third King George is on the throne, a young man, English-born, English-spoken, and the old dread names of your boyhood, Pretender, Jacobite, French ships in the offing, have faded into stories old men tell, because the risings came and were broken, in 1715 when you were 16 and again in 1745 when you were 46, and the succession the dying queen made safe with a staff pressed into a steady man's hands has held and holds and will hold. That was her last work, done speechless from a bed, and almost no one thanks her for it, and it is the ground every English life has been quietly built on since. You think of that some evenings, how the greatest gifts are like the best joinery, invisible when they hold, only ever noticed if they fail. Anne herself has been 50 years in the dark under the Abbey floor, and the world has done with her memory what you watched it begin to do that first autumn, worn it smooth. Good Queen Anne, people say now, if they say anything, a phrase with the corners rubbed off, a reign of victories and church building and stout, comfortable furniture. The young know her as a style of chair leg. The whispers about the coffin never quite died. They never do, but they aged as whispers age, into a curiosity, a thing said over walnuts and port. Did you ever hear that Queen Anne's coffin was almost square, poor soul, and someone says fancy, and the talk moves on. Only you, of all the diners in England could put a number to it, and you never have, and now you never will, because everyone who could confirm or deny you is gone. The clerk in black, the woman with the candle, the plumber and his ruined whisper, the yeoman, Master Harben. You are, as far as you know, the last pair of hands. It is a strange office, being the last, and no one appoints you to it, and no one relieves you of it. You simply notice one year that the secret now lives in a single skull, yours, and will die there, and that this is right, and that keeping it to the end is the final stroke of the work, the last nail-seated flush. Though not quite to no one. Susanna knew 39 years of marriage's worth of knowing until you buried her in your own work in oak you had set aside the way your master set his aside 4 years ago now, and the shop was very quiet for a long time after, and the books have never balanced quite so sharply since, and you keep her spectacles in the drawer of the bench, and that is all that will be said about that, because some weights are not for lifting in company, and one other. This past spring your granddaughter Hannah, who is 11 and has Susanna's exact eyes, and no fear of anything except thunder, found you sewing, caught you rather, at the window bench with needle and waxed thread, moving a small flannel-wrapped something from the lining of your old waistcoat into the lining of your new one, your hands doing from memory what they first did at 15, and she asked, straight as a chisel, the way she asks everything, "What is that, grandfather?" And you looked at her a long moment, and you thought, the oath was to a government of men 50 years dead, concerning a queen 50 years buried, and this child will live to see the century turn, and when she is old this will all be as far from her as the old King's Armada is from me, and somebody, some day, ought to know that it was all real, and that it was done gently. So you told her, not the number, never the number goes with you, but the rest, the knock, the palace corridor with the cold plaster, the poor kind suffering lady propped in the bed with her breath dragging, the ivory comb, the oak and the lead and the velvet, the torchlit night, the sling at the vault's edge, and the boy who went and was invisible. She listened the way children listen to the true things, utterly still, mouth a little open, and at the end she looked at the gilt nail lying in its flannel in your palm, 50 years bright, and she did not ask to hold it, which is how you knew she'd understood everything, and she said, did it hurt her, the coffin being wrong? Wrong, out of the mouths of children. And you heard yourself answer with the whole of your life, it wasn't wrong, Hannah, it was true. Those are different things. Everyone had lied to her, all her days, kindly and cruelly, about that body of hers, and the box was the first thing in years that just told the truth and bore the weight and carried her gently. That's all the best work ever does, child, tell the truth, bear the weight, carry gently. It's a trade, and it can be learned. And she nodded and went back to whatever 11 was doing that day, and you sat at the window with the needle in your hand in the evening coming on, and you were, for a long quiet while, as close to entirely at peace as a man is let to be. So take this last walk with the old man, the one he still takes on idle Sundays when the knee allows, in at the great door of the Abbey with the gawpers and the country cousins, slower now, hat in hand, along the worn stones east. The vergers know him by sight after 50 years, and let him stand where he likes. They take him for a pious old tradesman, which is near enough. The south aisle of Henry VII's chapel, the plain stone, the feet of strangers passing all day over the names. 12 feet down, in the dark that once breathed on a boy's face the work is holding. The plumber's seam, without a pinhole, 60-year man that he was, the clenched bottom, the proved joints, the battens, the oak that was old under Elizabeth, all of it standing its long watch in the dark exactly as it stood the night the windlass turned, and it will stand it for centuries. That is the plain fact of good oak and true lead and honest labour, long after every person in this story is themselves gone into other men's work. And the thought is not morbid to him at all any more, has not been for years. It is the opposite of morbid. It is the nearest thing to forever that a man with a plane ever gets to touch. Holding, madam, the old man thinks. The same clumsy boy's report, worn smooth as a rod's handle now, all true and holding. Then he puts on his hat and goes home through the Sunday streets to his dinner, and his granddaughter's noise, and his bench, and his sleep. And now, let it all go, because centuries will pass. They have passed already. You and I are the proof of it, lying here in the dark on the far side of them. The London of torch smoke and link boys will be paved and piped and lit until a night itself is half abolished. The gin shops and the conduits and the muffled drays will vanish. The trades will change until hardly a soul earns bread with an auger and a glue pot. The Abbey will still stand. It stands tonight. And under the same worn stone in the same south aisle, she is still there, Anne, with George beside her whom she loved, and her sister, and her little son, and every one of her 17, gathered at last in the one nursery that never lost a child, and the stone above them is walked over daily by tourists from nations that did not exist when the windlass turned, and almost none of them look down, and the work is still holding, and the work will outlast us too. Some things do not change. The body's weariness at the end of a long day has not changed since her day, or Thomas's, or the first day anyone ever lay down. The need to set the burden down, that has not changed. You have carried things today. Everyone has. Some of them had handles and some of them did not, and you have carried them anyway. The way people do, the way she did, the way the boy did, mostly unseen, mostly unthanked, and that is enough now. The carrying is over for tonight, so lay it down. Whatever it is, whatever it weighs, it will keep till morning. The good work always keeps. Let your hands go loose the way a joiner's hands go loose when the last tool is hung on its nail. Let your shoulders come down from around your ears. They have been up there half the day. You can feel them lowering now, slow, like something heavy going down on a windlass, smooth and steady and true. Let the day's voices thin out the way the anthem thinned into the dark above the candles, further and further up, until they are only a note, and then not even that. You are warm enough. You are safe enough. You have done enough. That is not flattery. It is a measurement, and measurements do not lie. Enough, and enough, and enough. The house around you settles and ticks. The small sounds of timber easing, the same sounds a workshop makes at night when the fire is banked, and the dog is asleep and the finished work stands quiet in the middle of the dark, needing nothing, complete. Somewhere far off there may be a bell or a car passing like far-off water, or only your own breath, dragging soft and even now. No click in it, just the long, slow tide. Let it come then. Let sleep take you the way the coffin went down, gently, gently, at the pace of the place, with unseen hands minding every edge. Let the world's great secrets keep themselves for one night without your help. Let the last candle gutter. Let the torches burn down along the emptying road. The boy is asleep in the shavings. The old man is asleep above his shop. The queen is asleep under the stone, and has been safe in true work these 300 years, and you, whoever you are, wherever the dark finds you, your work is holding too, all true and holding. Good night.